I believe on the phone with us is Delthia Ricks from Newsday. Hello, Delthia.
Hello there.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, just fine. How are you today?
Oh, pretty good, except for the, the dreary weather. But if that's my biggest problem, I'm good. But listen, I see your story here. Suffolk warns others may have been exposed to confirmed case of measles. Well, you're the reporter. What's going on there?
Well, it seems that person who was under investigation is now free of measles, but public health officials are investigating contacts that person may have had over the weekend just this past weekend. At that time, the person was still infectious. And measles, as you probably well know, is one of the most, if not the most, contagious viral disease. Mm-hmm. So they're looking into all of the people who may have come in contact with this person. This person was in a bank. We don't know if this is a male or female. The person has been identified as an exchange student from Europe. The country was not identified, but that person was in a bank, a supermarket, and a pharmacy.
Mm-hmm. Right. I understand that if someone is in a room that has measles, that measles vaccine the measles germ can stay in a room for up to 2 hours afterwards.
That's true. Okay. That's what I meant by it being possibly the most infectious virus known. And the reason why also is because it takes so few particles of the virus to cause infection.
Right.
And people think of it as a childhood disease, but the consequences aren't necessarily childlike because it can cause brain damage. Right now, there is a flight attendant who was on a flight a week ago, an Israeli airline, who came in contact with a passenger, a 10-year-old passenger who had measles. And she got the measles from that passenger, but she's in a coma and has been in a coma for more than a week.
Oh, that's not good. Okay, so, I'll ask you the loaded question. What do you think it is? Why are people not getting vaccinated?
Well, clearly, and this has been going on now for 19 years, mm-hmm. There's a belief out there in the world, pseudoscience, among people who are, just kind of commonly called anti-vaxxers, right, who believe that vaccines cause autism. Mm-hmm. And they believe also that vaccines are filled with all sorts of toxins and poisons, and that if they don't vaccinate their kids will be healthier mm-hmm. as a result of staying away from vaccines. And it's really quite the opposite. But all of this has grown out of one scientific paper from a guy named Andrew Wakefield, who published it in The Lancet in 1999.
Yep.
1998. Somewhere in there. Yeah. Don't quote me on. Quote me on the years.
I recognize the name.
Yeah. And he was a British doctor who has since been disgraced. His medical license was stripped from him by the British medical authorities. He has since moved to the United States. He lives in Texas, but he's still spinning that old web that vaccines cause autism, and he has a huge following, and a lot of this disinformation is disseminated on Facebook, right, on Twitter, and elsewhere, through social media, right, and it's really caused a problem because disinformation is so much easier to believe than actual science. It's actually catchier. There are a lot of slogans right, with it, so people believe those things.
Yeah. There are two things. One of the things is we have to when we have these conversations, and I just had one outside my door of the studio here, what we're really driving at is how to convince the people that haven't done it to do it. And how would we do that? I always see, I mean, I spoke to Newsday at one time. We talked about the flu vaccine.
You and I had that discussion.
Okay, it was you. Okay.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I think it's a matter of trust. I really do. But I also think that people like Andrew Wakefield and the advent of social media, I mean, we saw the effect of social media in our last election. So now I believe the same kind of thing is happening with this. So you're right. People read that stuff and they believe it. But how do we counteract that? Is there...
You know, I honestly think there needs to be a summit of, you know, of very smart people, of physicians and scientists and lay people who are committed to committed to turning this around, right. Because we're heading down a very slippery slope at this point, because it doesn't take much for the safety net, which is called herd immunity. Right. Herd immunity occurs when the majority of people in a population are immunized against, you know, the common infectious diseases, which would include all of those childhood infections, measles, mumps, right. Diphtheria, which is horrible, all you know, with all of the chicken pox. I think if a summit is held and people figure out how to counter these messages that are circulating as we speak online, we may be able to turn it around. But there's this huge belief, this anti-science stance now that's out there, and that's a bigger problem still, because along with the anti-vaccine movement, we now have people who believe that Earth is flat.
Yeah,
you know, it all kind of bubbles up out of the same kettle.
I know, we're on a rocket to the Middle Ages. Yeah. Well, you know, I think there are a few things here working against, you know, us wanting to get people vaccinated. One of them, I remember when I was a kid, you know, babies, okay, they got some vaccines, but the vaccine schedule today looks horrific. To give a newborn baby 8 shots in one, you know, in the first volley of vaccines, and then you're waiting a year or whatever it is, and then 8 more, and it just...
Well, you know what, that's part of that comment you just made is straight out of the anti-vaxxer handbook.
Okay.
Because
is that not the case?
Well, there are vaccinations, but you know, how long does it take to give it? A few seconds. It's not as if this is, you know, some horrible surgical procedure that the baby is undergoing.
Oh yeah, no. The shot itself, but you're introducing foreign ingredients, and
what you breathe in fungi with every breath.
Okay.
You know, you're breathing in fungi, you're breathing in bacteria, but your immune system, because you're introduced to it, you do not get infected by those things. Someone who has compromised immunity, someone with HIV, someone with cancer or other immune compromising conditions will probably get sick by those things that are just naturally in the air.
Right.
A vaccine is not... I'm talking about super microscopic particle. And it's not, you know, the entire bacterium, as would be the case for a pertussis vaccination, or the entire virus,
right.
or a measles vaccination. It's a tiny protein snippet. So infinitesimal you would not be able to see it with the naked eye.
Okay.
What happens? Your immune system, the baby's immune system, sees that, recognizes it, and then mounts an immune response to it. And then you have a baby who has a wall of defense against all of those horrible things that are out there.
Right.
I would much rather have a healthy baby who is immune to all of that stuff than a vulnerable baby who can get measles and die.
Well, me too. But aren't there, now tell me, you can confirm or deny, are there any children who've died after getting the vaccine?
No. I mean, there have been probably in history. I'm not going to say no. And are there vaccines that don't always work? That happens as well.
Right.
I'm not saying vaccines are perfect.
Right.
But they provide two things. They provide protection for the individual, and they provide protection for the greater public at the same time, because that's what contributes to herd immunity, the public safety net.
Yep. Yeah. I think, true, one of the things that works against us trying to convince people is that most of us, like you initially said, in my lifetime, there has never been a measles outbreak like that. So I don't have any memory of what that would look like, and also how fast it could affect large numbers of people.
Yeah. Measles spreads like wildfire.
Right.
You mentioned it earlier, 2 hours in a room, most of the people would be infected. 90%, if you go to the CDC's website, it indicates that 90% of people in a single room could be infected by one person coughing and sneezing.
Right. I don't know. I think if I was, let's just say I took on a project of convince America to take vaccines, what would I do?
You would have to show them what it was like in the pre-vaccine era.
Well, that's, and you make a good point. I think that one of the things, and we just said it, that none of us have experienced that in our lifetime because we've all taken the vaccine.
Right.
So we don't know what it looks like. We should. I mean, we can watch cartoons all day. How come there isn't, let's get a piece of history and show what it looks like when this happens.
Well, maybe that's what needs to happen. That's a brilliant idea. You recall the anti-smoking commercials that the New York City Health Department put out a few years ago with these grisly cases of lung cancer where people, were had a trach tube in their throat because they couldn't breathe anymore because their lungs were so damaged.
Right. Grisly was the perfect word, and none of us had ever seen an affected lung like that.
Right.
And I think that had quite an effect on quite a few people.
Right.
I mean, I think there are a couple of things that would be needed to be addressed. But again, I still keep going back to that idea of trust. Not only do we have to come up with a campaign that we think would be effective, but we need people that others can trust to tell them that information.
Well, for some reason, they trust these actresses who
Andrew Wakefield. I know, but but my mental picture was, a guy gets up on a soapbox and he puts his finger in somebody's face and says, "You should take the vaccine." And when somebody asks, "Well, what's in it?" and he doesn't get an answer to his question, he's not feeling very trusting. He's not going to, I think we need trustworthy professionals that can answer the questions. And that, again, one of the other things, and this may be from the anti-vaxxers, I don't know, but there's an understanding, there's a vaccine account that people who are hurt by the vaccine can be paid out of if they've experienced some problem with this. That doesn't help if that exists.
Well, that stems from people who believe their children's autism was caused by vaccine, quote, injury.
Okay.
And that dates back many, many years. But one thing I do want to point out, I had mentioned briefly actresses. Gwyneth Paltrow is a very powerful anti-vaxxer, and she's been on the Internet and other venues touting the anti-vaccine message. So what you would need is someone of her star power or caliber to present the counter argument. Right.
Yeah, I do really think that is what we need. If we can, going to get more people, it's I don't know. But besides this, we have a lot of other problems. You and I are someday going to sit down and have a go at the Lyme disease thing.
Oh, yeah, we should. Because
yeah.
There's a new tick in town.
Oh, boy. That's right. I saw that. What's the name of it?
The Longhorn Tick.
That's it.
The Longhorn Tick. It's here all the way from China.
Great.
It's horrible, but that's another story.
Yeah.
The other, there is one point I do want to make, and I think it's a good take-home message, that a number of people are easily swayed these days by the anti-vaccine message because they've never seen polio.
Right.
They've never seen measles outbreaks, and no one living today has any concept of what smallpox was like or diphtheria, which is unimaginably horrible. That's so unimaginably horrible, I don't even want to think about it.
Yeah. No, you're right. But the History Channel, we should tell them, hey, you need to run a series on what happens when you don't.
Oh yeah.
As far as vaccines.
Yeah, and let them see some of the footage from the past of horrible pox-ridden smallpox cases or diphtheria, where this gray, scary, thick membrane grows across the back of the throat, and you choke to death because you can't breathe. Those are the kinds of things that vaccines prevent.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head right there. We need some kind of special where people can actually see this. And I think that right away, if a certain percentage of those people who haven't been vaccinated may just go out and do it right away. But there's going to be the holdouts that just don't ever want to do it. But I think certainly we could win the war if we got the better percentages, because then the herd immunity may be protected. That's
true.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take much to lose herd immunity, because to protect the population, and Suffolk County, where this, getting back to that story, where this case occurred, has a high level of herd immunity. But anything under that, we have like 95%. Anything under that, when you start falling into to 89%, 88%, then you can have outbreaks of measles, chickenpox, and other highly contagious diseases.
Right. Oh, well, let's just keep working on it, Delthia, and we'll see what we can do.
And we'll talk about that Longhorn Tick.
Yes. Oh, my goodness. Yep, that one. And also, glyphosate is also in my radar. You know that's the active ingredient in the Roundup pesticide. Right.
Glyphosate. I've been tweeting about that.
Oh, have you?
I have.
I just spoke to an endocrinologist at the NYU Langone Center, and I asked him a direct question: is glyphosate an endocrine disruptor? And it took him a little while to get back to me, but he said, apparently so.
That's interesting. And the court in California just a couple of weeks ago ruled again in the favor of a gentleman who said his
non-Hodgkin's lymphoma
was caused by it. Yeah,
right. Which is why now I believe you're going to hear a lot of people saying that glyphosate causes cancer, only because those two cases became public.
Right.
But there's not a lot of mention about glyphosate being an endocrine disruptor, which affects gestation, reproduction, of course, pituitary gland, thyroid gland, all of the hormones in your body. To me, this is big. And the peer-reviewed article that I read was from 2009 in an issue of Toxicology. And that concluded that it was also an endocrine disruptor. So that article is 10 years old. And you don't hear anything about that anymore.
Yeah, but people love to put Roundup on their lawns to keep the weeds away.
Yep. And now they've been, I've seen some sporadic articles about the amount of glyphosate in certain things. They've been testing the beer lately. Glyphosate in all of the beers. And it didn't matter whether they were organic or not.
And it's in cereals, oatmeal.
Anything with wheat. They use glyphosate to desiccate the wheat. And they soak it before which kills the wheat, but it also produces more seed somehow. And that's what they're looking for, more seed. But then they cut the wheat down and send it to process. And so our daily bread has basically been poisoned, which is really an ironic.
But there are people out there who say it's as safe as drinking water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw a video with a Monsanto salesman that said it was safe, and they said, well, if it's so safe, then you drink it. And of course he said no. The peer-reviewed article that I read said that it didn't matter the concentrations of glyphosate in any compound that you made, the effects were the same. Which was scary. And it went through the science of T cells and how many affected this and that. And it basically, it pointed definitely to testosterone levels in females were higher. But I'm not a scientist, so I read the abstract, which gives, But that's for another time. We'll have to, we'll go do lunch or something and we'll fix the world's problems.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Delthia, and I hope to speak to you real soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
You take care.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that was Delthia Ricks from Newsday, and we want to, of course, thank Delthia for calling and spending the time with us, and Newsday for making the reporters available, and we get to talk about a lot of these stories.